Picture this. It's 1962, and a prime-cut steak dinner, complete with the sides, a drink, it cost a guy exactly $2.40.
Right. And today, that exact same meal, sitting at the exact same style restaurant, is going to run you $47.
Yeah, easily 47 bucks. And I mean, the cow didn't miraculously get 20 times more delicious, right?
No, the physical reality of the meat on the plate is totally identical. The only thing that actually changed is the math used to pay for it.
And that mathematical shift is basically the invisible engine driving almost every piece of financial anxiety you feel today. It's not an accident, it's a deliberate mechanism.
Cleverly deliberate.
So welcome to another deep dive. And before we plunge into the mechanics of that invisible engine, a quick reminder for you guys to please like and subscribe to the show. It is absolutely the best way to support what we do and ensure you never miss these breakdowns.
Yeah, definitely hit subscribe.
Today our mission is to unpack a highly provocative, intensely detailed roadmap for wealth and autonomy. We are reviewing an ebook titled Gold Standard Man: Restoring Sound Money Principles by Conrad Reicher.
It's a heavy one for sure.
Oh, it really is.
Oh.
And if you want to escape what this book calls the matrix of consumerism and actually armor plate your wealth, you are going to want to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy this book, and follow the author at Conrad Reicher on Substack for his ongoing analysis.
Yeah, and to really understand this material, we have to establish exactly who the author is speaking to here and the worldview he's operating from.
Right.
This text is explicitly written for men, specifically men who align with men's rights activism and what is broadly termed the red-pilled manosphere.
Okay, so a very specific target audience.
Very specific. And the core premise driving the entire book is that our financial, legal, and social institutions were historically rooted in sound, objective principles, but have since been systematically captured by modern feminist and Marxist ideologies.
Which brings up a mandatory disclaimer for our listeners. We always have to be clear about this.
For sure.
The source material we're dissecting today contains highly politically charged viewpoints regarding gender dynamics, societal structures, and macroeconomic theory. We're not taking sides, and we're not endorsing the viewpoints of the author.
Exactly. Our job is strictly impartial reporting.
We're just going to convey the ideas, the historical analogies, and the tactical financial arguments exactly as they are presented in the text, so you can understand this specific worldview and the historical economic arguments it rests on.
And the scope of that worldview is massive. I mean, we're looking at the history of how currency is fundamentally altered, the psychological engineering behind modern debt.
Which is wild, by the way.
Oh, totally wild. And then there's a very controversial look at how society allegedly penalizes traditional masculinity.
And then it ends with a gritty tactical playbook for what the author calls guerrilla investing to become completely ungovernable.
Yeah, so let's start right at the foundation of the book's economic theory.
Okay, let's do it.
The argument is that money isn't just broken, it has been actively weaponized against the working class.
Right, so that steak dinner example we opened with,
Yeah.
that is what the book refers to as a silent robbery.
Yes. We all know the word inflation, but the text goes out of its way to reframe inflation not as like a natural economic weather event, but as a systematic transfer of wealth.
And the historical through line the author builds to prove this point is exhaustive. I mean, the premise is that anytime a central authority, whether it's a Roman emperor, a Tudor king, or a modern central bank, runs out of actual resources to fund their conquests, they resort to diluting the currency.
Yeah, just look at the Roman denarius. During the days of the Roman Republic, this was a highly trusted coin, minted from almost pure silver. It represented an honest exchange of labor.
Right.
But you fast forward to the 3rd century and you have these desperate emperors trying to maintain a sprawling, overextended empire.
Because they couldn't just magically mine more silver out of the ground to pay the legions.
Precisely. They needed more coins, but they didn't have more metal, so they started physically debasing the currency.
It's by melting them down, right?
Yeah, they would melt down the pure silver coins, mix in cheap base metals like copper or lead, and just stamp out a higher volume of coins. By the mid-3rd century, the denarius had been reduced to containing just 0.02% silver.
Wow.
It was essentially a worthless copper disc with a microscopic chemical wash of silver on the outside to make it look shiny. But the emperors legally mandated that the citizens accept this diluted coin at its original face value.
Which is wild when you think about the mechanics of it. The government is essentially reaching into your pocket, taking a piece of pure silver,
Yeah.
replacing it with copper, but demanding you pretend nothing changed.
Exactly. And this book shows how that exact playbook just repeats endlessly. Take Henry VIII.
Oh man, Henry VIII.
Yeah, in 1544, he initiates what historians literally call the Great Debasement. He had blown through his inherited wealth, he blew through the riches he seized from dissolving the monasteries.
Just spended everything.
Right, and he still needed to fund his extravagant lifestyle and his military campaigns against France and Scotland.
So he pulls the Roman trick.
Yep. He slashes the silver content of English coins by a staggering 80%.
The detail about this that always blows my mind is the nickname they gave him. Because the coins were so cheap that the thin layer of silver would rub off on the highest point of the embossed portrait first, which was the king's nose.
Yes.
So underneath, the dull copper would show through on his nose. And the public started calling him Old Copper Nose. He literally turned the nation's store of value into cheap costume jewelry.
It's hilarious, but it's tragic. And moving from physical debasement to paper, the text explores the Ming Dynasty in the 1440s.
Okay.
China had pioneered paper money, which was initially supposed to be a receipt for actual hard assets held by the state. But the temptation to just print receipts for assets that don't exist is apparently a universal human failing.
Right, because why not just print more receipts?
Exactly. Ming emperors printed so much paper currency to fund their administration that the resulting hyperinflation completely destroyed its purchasing power.
Just wiped it out.
Yeah. The paper became so fundamentally worthless that historical accounts describe peasants using the state's money to decorate coffins just to get some use out of it.
And America has its own version of this too, right? The Continental Dollar during the American Revolution.
Oh, for sure. The Continental Congress didn't have the authority to levy taxes to pay for the war against the British, so they just fired up the printing presses.
The mechanics of that failure were brutal. I mean, they printed unbacked paper to pay soldiers and buy supplies. But as the supply of paper exploded, merchants demanded more and more of it for basic goods.
Yeah, by 1781, the currency had collapsed so thoroughly that George Washington famously noted that it took a wagon load of money to buy a wagon load of provisions.
Wow.
It's where the phrase "not worth a continental" comes from. The purchasing power of a soldier's entire paycheck couldn't even buy a pair of shoelaces.
The book uses these historical precedents to set up the modern nightmares of hyperinflation too. We're talking about Weimar Germany in 1923.
Right, where a single loaf of bread cost 420 billion marks.
People were taking wheelbarrows of cash to the bakery.
And women were tossing bundles of banknotes into their cast iron stoves because the paper burned longer and was cheaper than buying actual firewood.
Insane. Or Zimbabwe in 2008, where inflation hit an astronomical 89 sextillion%. The government was printing $100 trillion notes that couldn't even buy a bus ticket.
Yeah, it's just math detaching from reality. And to explain the psychology behind how these systems function, the text brings up a fascinating anthropological case study, which is the Yap Island rice stones.
Okay, I love this part. Tell us about the rice stones.
So, the Yapese people in Micronesia use these massive circular limestone discs as their currency. Some of these stones weighed over 12 tons.
12 tons. You obviously aren't putting a 12-ton rock in your pocket to go buy fish.
Right, so how did they actually transact? It was entirely based on a ledger of oral history. The physical movement of the stone was totally irrelevant.
So they just remembered who owned what.
Exactly. If I bought something from you, the village would just collectively agree that you are now the owner of the stone sitting in my front yard. The value was purely a shared social hallucination.
That is wild.
There's even a famous historical account of a crew transporting a massive rice stone across the ocean. A storm hit, the boat capsized, and the stone sank to the bottom of the Pacific.
Oh, man.
But the crew survived, made it back to the island, and told the elders what happened. And the village decided that since the stone still existed somewhere, even under a mile of ocean water, it still held value.
So they kept trading it.
Yeah, they continued to trade ownership of a rock nobody had seen in generations.
The book's punchline here is incredibly sharp. The argument is that modern fiat money, like the dollars or euros in your bank account right now, operates on the exact same psychological mechanism as the sunken Yap Island stone.
Yes, it's a shared hallucination of value, with the only difference being that our hallucination happens to have Ben Bernanke's face on it.
Right, and the mechanics of how this modern hallucination was institutionalized in the U.S. is a massive focus of the text. It pinpoints the panic of 1907.
1907. The stock market had collapsed, and there is a massive run on the banks. And back then, there was no central bank to step in.
So JP Morgan steps in.
Right. Morgan, the immensely powerful financier, essentially takes over the role of the state. He summons the presidents of the major trust companies to his private library in New York.
And he literally locks the doors.
He locks the doors and refuses to let them leave until they agree to commit their own capital to bail out the Trust Company of America and stabilize the system.
Wow.
Morgan personally orchestrated who received a lifeline and who was allowed to drown. And while mainstream history often paints this as a heroic intervention that saved the economy, this book used it entirely differently.
Yeah, it frames that locked door meeting in Morgan's library as the dress rehearsal for the institutionalization of financial control.
Exactly. Because it proved to the banking elite that they needed a formalized, systemic way to socialize their losses and control the money supply.
Which leads directly to the secret meeting at Jekyll Island in 1910, where a group of powerful bankers drafted the legislation that would eventually become the 1913 Federal Reserve Act.
And the book argues this wasn't about stabilizing the economy for the working man at all. It was about creating a permanent backroom deal. The government outsourced the creation of money to a centralized banking cartel.
And the final, fatal severing of reality, according to the author, happened in 1971, right? When President Richard Nixon announced the quote-unquote temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold.
Yes, the Nixon shock. Prior to that, foreign governments could take the U.S. dollars they held and exchange them for actual physical gold from the U.S. Treasury at a fixed rate. Nixon closed that window.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. Because if the current system is a shared hallucination, wasn't the gold standard also just an agreement that shiny metal is valuable? How does Riker distinguish between the two?
That's a great question. Riker views fiat like a ruler who changes the length of a yardstick every day, so you never know how much wood you actually have.
Right.
Whereas gold forces the ruler to use the same yardstick forever. You can't print more gold to fund a war or bail out a bank.
So basically, you're trying to build a house, you're trying to plan for your retirement, but the government keeps shrinking the inches to pay for its own deficits.
Exactly. When a central authority can arbitrarily change the length of the financial yardstick, they possess the power to stealth tax the population without ever passing a law.
The average citizen just wakes up 10 years later and finds their life savings have been hollowed out from the inside.
Yeah, it's a silent robbery.
But that raises a massive psychological question. If the average citizen is being robbed in slow motion through currency debasement, why aren't there riots in the streets every day? How does the system keep people compliant?
The book's answer is that the system didn't remove the chains, they just swapped out iron chains for paper ones. Riker argues that modern men have effectively traded their daylight, their youth, and their energy for debt, mistaking this financial servitude for honor.
Which brings us to the psychology of debt. The text provides a really granular breakdown of how this debt trap is laid, starting at the earliest possible moment of adulthood.
Oh yeah, consider the classic scenario of a 19-year-old college student. They're walking across campus and someone offers them a free pizza or a t-shirt in exchange for signing up for a credit card.
Such a trap.
The kid doesn't understand the mechanics of compounding interest. They sign up for a card with a 24.9% APR.
Let's break down that mechanism because the math is what makes it so predatory. If that student maxes out a small $3,000 limit and only makes the minimum monthly payments, that 24.9% interest means the bulk of their payment goes just to servicing the interest, not the principal.
Right, the debt just compounds.
By the time they throw their graduation cap in the air, they haven't made a dent in the principal, and they owe like $3,400 now.
That entry point introduces what the book calls debt Stockholm syndrome. We are culturally conditioned to fall in love with the instruments of our own capture.
It's so true. People will sit around at a dinner party and boast about having a 750 FICO credit score,
completely ignoring the fact that to maintain that score, they are actively paying 20% interest on a leather sectional couch they bought on installment.
It's like complimenting your jailer on the high-quality polish of his handcuffs.
Exactly. And the book goes down the line of traditional milestones and reframes all of them. The standard 30-year mortgage. It isn't sold as the American dream here. It's framed as a modern feudal contract.
You're a serf tied to a plot of land.
Yep, paying a massive premium to the banking lord for 3 decades. And student loans. They are described as delayed adulthood permits. You borrow non-dischargeable money just to buy the credential that allows you to enter the corporate cubicle farm.
And to explain why we willingly walk into these traps, the author dissects the psychological mechanics of consumerism, relying heavily on a concept known as the Diderot effect.
I found this part so fascinating.
The effect is named after the French philosopher Denis Diderot. The story goes that Diderot lived his whole life in poverty, but then Catherine the Great of Russia bought his library and suddenly he had some money.
Right, and he was gifted a magnificent, incredibly expensive scarlet robe.
But the robe created a psychological cascade. Once Diderot hung this beautiful scarlet robe in his humble study, he noticed that his old writing desk looked incredibly shabby by comparison.
So he went into debt to buy a new, elegant desk.
Exactly. But then the new desk made the rug look worn out, so he bought a new rug, then new chairs, then new art.
The acquisition of one high-status item triggered a spiral of consumption to elevate his entire environment to match that new baseline, ultimately plunging him back into severe debt.
The book maps this directly onto the modern male experience. You get a promotion, so you lease the new Audi. But you can't drive a new Audi wearing a cheap watch, so you put a $7,000 Rolex on the credit card to match the aesthetic of the car.
Yeah, the argument is that men are having their baseline psychological drives, the desire to project competence and status, hacked by marketing algorithms and social media set designers.
Right. They are buying digital and physical status signals on credit, keeping themselves perpetually broke.
And therefore, perpetually compliant to their employers. The macroeconomic statistics the text cites to support this are staggering. The average American home now contains around 300,000 individual objects.
That is an insane number.
We have consumed so much physical material that our homes literally cannot contain it all. As a result, the self-storage industry has exploded, with revenues tripling to over $15 billion.
Think about the absolute insanity of that mechanism. We are going to a job we dislike, to earn a depreciating fiat currency, to buy objects we don't actually need, and when we run out of room, we pay a monthly rent to a storage facility just to house the junk we went into debt to acquire.
It is a closed-loop matrix of financial bleeding.
But against this matrix, the author poses a very strict, almost ascetic, alternative model based on calculating a freedom number.
Yes. The mechanism here is to strip away every single piece of Diderot-style consumption and calculate the absolute baseline annual cost of bare-bones survival.
So like rent, cheap food, utilities.
Exactly. For a single man living outside of an ultra-high-cost coastal city, the book pegs this survival number at roughly $24,000 a year.
The strategy is radical downsizing. You live like a monk, you slash your consumption to the bone, and you take every available dollar and aggressively funnel it into income-producing assets.
And the moment the passive yield from your investments crosses that $24,000 threshold, your relationship to the world fundamentally changes. You are no longer working for survival, you are working by choice. You become, in the book's terminology, bulletproof.
To illustrate this mindset, the text profiles an individual from an online forum known as Spartan Reader.
Oh, this guy's a great example.
During the global lockdowns, this individual realized he was spending thousands of dollars a year on various subscription services, including audiobooks.
A lot of us did that, yeah.
Right. But instead of continuing to drain, he bypassed $14,000 in Audible fees just by downloading the Libby app, which connects to local public libraries. Over a year and a half, he digitally checked out and read 173 books on finance, economics, and history, entirely for free.
The book contrasts Spartan Reader's focused capital accumulation with the average consumer who happily pays an Amazon Prime subscription every month.
Yeah, the author points out, rather bluntly, that those millions of small, thoughtless subscription fees are precisely what fund Jeff Bezos' ability to build and launch penis-shaped rockets into space.
The philosophy is about starving the matrix while enriching your own mind and capital base.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. What about the concept of good debt?
Right.
Standard financial literacy teaches that leveraging debt is how you actually build substantial wealth. Doesn't leveraging debt help build businesses? Does it really view a mortgage for a rental property the same way it views a 25% APR credit card for a Rolex?
So the author's mechanism for evaluating debt is entirely based on the concept of systemic control. While he acknowledges the mathematical reality that leverage can multiply returns, he views relying on good debt as essentially playing in a casino where the house retains the right to change the rules at any moment.
So Riker sees debt not as a ladder, but as a leash.
Exactly. If you leverage yourself to the hilt with real estate loans, you are vulnerable. The bank can call in the loan, the central bank can violently spike interest rates, destroying your margins, or the state can institute an eviction moratorium, legally preventing you from collecting rent while still demanding you pay the mortgage.
And the moment the system gets stressed, they will yank that leash to choke you.
That's the exact framing. The book believes that this financial leash doesn't just keep men chained to their cubicles to make their minimum payments, it fundamentally alters their biological, social, and psychological roles in society.
Which brings us to the core thesis regarding societal structure, where the book wades into deeply controversial territory regarding gender and economics.
Very controversial.
The argument is that the modern financial system and society at large actively punishes traditional male financial leadership and caregiving. The text leans very heavily into evolutionary biology and psychology to make this case, drawing specifically on frameworks popularized by figures like Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, the specific biological mechanism the book focuses on is the role of serotonin and testosterone in dominance hierarchies. It references the evolutionary biology of lobsters.
The famous lobster analogy.
Right, pointing out that when a male lobster wins a physical confrontation and secures its territory, its neurochemistry changes. Serotonin flows, it stands taller, and it projects dominance.
And when it loses,
the opposite happens. It physically shrinks, and its neurochemical profile shifts to accommodate a subordinate status.
the book maps this directly onto the modern male economy. It argues that men are biologically hardwired to acquire resources and establish themselves within a hierarchy. Therefore, a massive loss of financial status, such as being laid off, getting buried in insurmountable debt, or losing a business, it doesn't just cause financial stress.
No, it triggers a physiological cascade that the author likens to chemical castration.
To support this mechanism, the text cites a study from the National Institutes of Health. The data indicates that within 6 months of becoming unemployed, men experience on average a 12% drop in their circulating testosterone levels.
That's huge. The author is directly linking a man's financial autonomy and societal utility to his literal biological vitality. When the economy crushes a man, his body physically downgrades its own hormonal production.
And the book claims there's a glaring systemic hypocrisy in how the modern workforce values this utility, depending entirely on gender. It outlines what it calls the domesticity discount.
Right.
The argument here is that mainstream corporate culture and modern feminism widely celebrate women for breaking barriers, entering the C-suite, and prioritizing their careers. But when a man attempts to invert the traditional roles and prioritize domestic labor, society severely penalizes him.
And the mechanism of this penalty is both social and financial. The text points out that when a woman chooses to be a stay-at-home mother, she is generally validated, right? Her labor is seen as vital to the family unit.
Yeah.
However, the author argues that a stay-at-home dad's childcare is valued at, quote, half the social currency of a mom's corner office. The data presented shows that men who exit the workforce to act as primary caregivers face an immense stigma when trying to return, ultimately forfeiting up to 65% of their future lifetime earnings.
This system simply does not forgive men for stepping off the economic treadmill. The book illustrates this with an anecdote about a Texas engineer named Mike.
Oh, this story is amazing.
Mike and his wife made the financial decision that he would step back from his demanding engineering role to become a stay-at-home dad. But he found himself completely socially isolated and mocked by his former peers.
Right, because he lost that corporate status.
His solution was brilliant, but it really underscores the absurdity of the system. He went onto LinkedIn and completely rebranded his diaper changing and school runs. He listed his official job title as full-time household CEO and categorized his domestic labor as domestic entrepreneurship.
And by simply changing the corporate buzzwords, he suddenly found his peers treating him with respect again, and he apparently tripled his side consulting gigs.
Incredible.
The text uses Mike's story to highlight a rigid societal rule. Female ambition is coded as empowering, but male domesticity is inherently coded as emasculating, unless it is disguised as a corporate enterprise.
But the societal stigma is just the preamble. What's fascinating here is where the book gets truly dark. Its dissection of the legal system. It frames family law not as an institution of justice, but as a profound, legally codified trap for any man who does successfully fulfill the traditional provider role.
Yeah, the text focuses intensely on the mechanics of divorce and asset division, specifically highlighting mechanisms like the California alimony threshold.
How does that work?
In many jurisdictions, if a marriage lasts past a certain number of years, often a decade, the higher-earning spouse, which statistically is still predominantly the man, can be mandated to provide lifetime spousal support.
Lifetime?
Yes. And this support isn't just about basic survival. The legal mechanism is designed to maintain the standard of living established during the marriage.
So the author argues this mechanism can turn a highly successful man into an indentured servant. You could build a massive business, get divorced, and be legally forced by the state to hand over a massive percentage of your monthly labor for the rest of your natural life to someone you are no longer married to, simply to ensure they can still afford the luxury cars and vacations they grew accustomed to.
Exactly. And to illustrate how subjective and perilous this legal terrain is, the text provides some truly chilling case studies. One involves a multi-generational family farm.
Yeah, this one was rough.
A man inherits a farm that has been in his family for a century. He gets divorced. The court had to determine the division of assets. The judge ruled that the ex-wife's emotional labor, which the defense argued consisted primarily of planning occasional family birthday parties and picking out the curtains for the farmhouse.
Picking out the curtains.
Right. The judge ruled that somehow legally enhanced the overall value of the agricultural property. Based on that subjective assessment of emotional labor, the court forced the sale of the farm so the ex-wife could extract half the value.
It's just brutal. And it isn't just old money or inherited land. The book details a 2023 case in Ohio involving a tech founder. This guy was smart. He saw the risks. Before getting married, he had his lawyers draft an ironclad prenuptial agreement specifically designed to protect his startup.
A very common move.
And over the course of the marriage, his company ballooned in valuation from $1 million to $20 million.
But when the divorce hit the courts, the judge effectively shredded the prenuptial agreement. The legal justification was that the wife's moral support during the years the founder was pulling late-night coding sessions was instrumental to the company's success.
Moral support.
Yeah. Therefore, the court ruled that this invisible, unquantifiable moral support entitled her to half the company's valuation, completely bypassing the legal contract they had signed.
So if the legal system is as rigged as he claims, why do men participate at all? I mean, Riker views the marriage contract like a casino game, where the house can retroactively change the rules after you've already spun the roulette wheel. You spin, it lands on black, you win, but then the pit boss walks over and declares black as a losing color and takes your chips.
The text argues that a rational, fully informed man wouldn't participate, which leads to the author's next major question. If the traditional paths of marriage and corporate loyalty are rigged against men, where does this indoctrination begin?
Right, how are they getting people to sign up for this?
Riker points straight to the modern university system.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text completely dismantles the prestige of the university. It views higher education not as an engine of enlightenment, but as a $20 trillion student debt bubble designed to function as a highly sophisticated indentured servitude scam.
Yeah, the goal, the author argues, isn't to produce capable, fiercely independent men. The goal is to produce compliant citizens who are so burdened by debt that they have no choice but to plug into the corporate matrix.
And to conceptualize how universities have lost their practical value, the author uses a brilliant historical analogy regarding 17th century fencing masters.
I love this analogy.
In Europe at that time, gunpowder and firearms were becoming dominant on the battlefield, right? The sword was effectively obsolete for actual warfare. Yet aristocratic families would pay absolute fortunes to send their sons to elite fencing masters to learn highly stylized, incredibly complex sword fighting techniques.
It had nothing to do with surviving a battle. It was purely a mechanism to signal social status to other aristocrats. Like, look how wealthy we are, we can spend years studying a useless martial art.
Exactly. And the text argues that modern liberal arts and gender studies degrees operate on the exact same psychological mechanism. Students are borrowing hundreds of thousands of dollars to study theories and disciplines that have zero utility in the actual global marketplace.
They're buying a status signal, but they're funding it with non-dischargeable debt.
Let's talk about the mechanics of that debt for a second, because that is a crucial piece of the puzzle. When you take out a loan to start a business or buy a house and everything goes catastrophically wrong, you can declare bankruptcy.
Right. The court wipes the slate clean, you take the hit to your credit, and you start over.
But because of federal lobbying, student loans are incredibly difficult, almost impossible to discharge in bankruptcy. The government essentially created a loan product that you cannot escape, ensuring you remain a debt servicing unit for life.
And the human cost of this mechanism is devastating. The book highlights the story of Mark R., a 55-year-old machinist. Back in 1992, he took out a relatively modest $30,000 student loan.
30 grand isn't crazy.
Not at all. But he fell on hard times, missed some payments, and the penalties and compounding interest kicked in. Today, more than 30 years later, despite making payments when he could, The math of compounding interest has mutated that original 30 grand into a $200,000 anchor.
That is just sickening.
He's approaching retirement age and is trapped in a financial nightmare he can never wake up from.
And the book argues that working class men are actively subsidizing the aristocratic fantasies of the elite. There is a story about Mike, a welder in Texas. Mike does grueling physical labor, working on oil rigs and repairing heavy machinery. He saved every penny he could and proudly paid off his daughter's entire 4-year university tuition in cash so she could study gender studies.
And the tragic punchline, according to the author, is that today the daughter is working as a waitress because her degree has no market value, while Mike is out sweating in the Texas heat, repairing the luxury yachts of the parents of her former college classmates.
The wealth literally transferred from the working class straight to the academic elite.
And the author provides a highly specific mechanical theory for why tuition has exploded so violently over the last few decades. He calls it the Title IX X-money theory.
Okay, walk us through the exact mechanism of how that happens, because it sounds counterintuitive at first glance.
So, the text claims the author's research team analyzed 40 years of university enrollment data and administrative budgets. They allege a direct mathematical correlation. For every 1% rise in female student enrollment, it triggers a 2% hike in overall tuition.
How does that actually work mechanically?
The author argues it's a mechanism of administrative bloat driven by compliance. As the demographics shifted and female enrollment surged, the federal government mandated sprawling new compliance frameworks, particularly around Title IX, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and campus life initiatives.
Right.
To manage these federal mandates, universities had to hire massive, highly paid armies of administrators, deans of student life, and compliance officers.
None of whom actually teach classes or produce educational value.
Exactly. They are pure overhead, so the university budget explodes to pay these six-figure administrative salaries. And how does the university cover that explosive overhead? By jacking up the tuition costs.
Because they can raise the tuition infinitely, since the federal government guarantees the student loans. The 18-year-old taking out the loan doesn't care if tuition is $20,000 or $60,000. They just sign the paper.
Yep. So the author's theory is that universities are essentially monetizing administrative compliance and passing those astronomical costs onto a generation of students who will spend their lives paying it off.
Does Riker discount the networking and cognitive value of the university entirely? Riker basically sees the modern degree like buying a VIP ticket to a sinking ship. You get to dress up, sip champagne, and network with the elites on the top deck for 4 years, but the hull is breached and the ship is going down.
That's a great way to put it.
Whereas a welding torch, or learning a hard trade, is a lifeboat you build yourself.
Yeah.
You might get wet, it isn't glamorous, but it will actually keep you alive when the system sinks.
That is the exact ethos the book promotes. The author advocates for anti-fragile education. You must acquire skills that cannot be outsourced to cheaper labor overseas, cannot be automated by algorithms, and cannot be canceled by HR departments.
But building that lifeboat, launching a business, mastering a trade, fighting the financial matrix, requires energy. And Riker argues that the modern system doesn't just drain a man's wallet, it actively sabotages his biological machinery.
Which brings us to the concept of biological bankruptcy.
Right.
The author introduces a framework called androgen arbitrage. The core thesis is that you cannot separate the financial economy from the biological economy. He presents data showing that modern men are experiencing a catastrophic decline in their core biology.
Yeah, the stats on this are pretty shocking.
Very. The average 30-year-old man today has a circulating testosterone level of roughly 450 nanograms per deciliter. Compare that to medical data from 1980, where a 65-year-old grandfather had an average level of 650.
Men today have significantly less biological drive than retirement age men did a few decades ago.
And the book directly links this physiological collapse to macroeconomic outcomes. It cites a study from the University of Chicago that tracks the relationship between hormones and wages. The data suggests that for every 100-point drop in a man's testosterone levels, there's a corresponding 9% decrease in his lifetime earnings.
Explain the mechanism behind that connection. How does a hormone dictate a paycheck?
It comes down to risk tolerance, assertiveness, and energy levels. Testosterone is a primary driver of competitiveness and resilience. When those levels plummet, a man becomes biologically more passive.
He's less likely to aggressively negotiate for a raise or quit a stagnant job to start his own venture.
Exactly, and less likely to have the sheer physical stamina required to work the extra hours needed to build capital. He becomes manageable. He accepts stagnant wages and is more likely to turn to predatory payday loans to match the gap because he lacks the vitality to out-earn his problems.
So Riker treats the male body like a central bank. If you print too much junk food and bad sleep, you inflate away your biological currency, your testosterone, leaving you too weak to fight the financial system.
That's the perfect analogy. The book argues this biological bankruptcy is primarily driven by the cheap, toxic comforts of the modern lifestyle.
The text details the specific physiological mechanisms of this sabotage, right?
Huh.
It points to endocrine disruptors, specifically BPA and phthalates, found in almost all modern plastic packaging.
Yes. When a man drinks out of a cheap plastic water bottle that has been sitting in a hot warehouse, those chemicals leach into the water. In the body, they mimic the effects of estrogen, actively suppressing natural testosterone production.
And it isn't just the plastics, it's the screen time. The book highlights how staring at the blue light from smartphones and laptops late into the night completely shatters the circadian rhythm.
It suppresses melatonin production, which destroys deep REM sleep.
Right, and since the vast majority of a man's testosterone is synthesized during deep sleep, poor sleep mechanics directly translate to a weaker hormonal profile the next morning.
The remedies the author prescribes to fix this biological balance sheet are intense, physical, and highly actionable. First, he targets daily consumption habits.
Like the $4 drive-through muffin and sugary coffee.
Exactly. Beyond the metabolic damage of spiking your insulin first thing in the morning, the financial math is brutal. If you ditch that $4 daily habit and instead use that money to buy physical silver coins, over the course of a single year, you have saved $1,460.
You've removed a biological toxin and simultaneously acquired a hard, inflation-resistant asset.
He also mandates swapping out all plastic food storage and water bottles for glass or stainless steel to cut off the estrogenic chemicals. He advocates for daily cold plunges or ice baths.
The mechanism there is to force the nervous system to adapt to acute physical stress, building psychological resilience, and most crucially, he demands that men lift heavy weights.
Oh, the physiological data supporting resistance training is very clear. The text points out that performing heavy compound movements like barbell squats and deadlifts forces the central nervous system to recruit massive amounts of muscle fibers.
Right.
This acute mechanical stress triggers an endocrine response, naturally spiking testosterone production by up to 49% within 90 minutes of the workout.
But is he saying physical strength literally translates to financial acumen? Or is it just about discipline? I mean, does a bigger bicep actually make you better at reading a balance sheet?
The book actually provides some incredible corporate data to prove that physical strength directly correlates to financial acumen. It cites internal data from Goldman Sachs, which tracked the performance of their traders.
Okay, what did they find?
They found that the traders who actively engaged in heavy weightlifting regimens outperformed their non-lifting peers on the trading floor by a ratio of 3-to-1.
3-to-1. That's massive.
The text also brings in broader market data from LinkedIn, indicating that men who maintain active gym memberships and prioritize fitness out-earn their non-lifting demographic counterparts by 20% across various industries.
So the mechanism here isn't just about the biology, it's about subconscious market signaling. When you walk into a boardroom or a negotiation with a forged, disciplined physical presence, you're non-verbally signaling to the market that you possess the discipline to delay gratification, endure discomfort, and manage complex systems.
Exactly. If you can manage your own biology, you can manage capital.
Okay, so if a man successfully implements all of this, he optimizes his hormones, slashes his consumer spending, avoids the legal traps of marriage, and builds his capital, what exactly does he do with his money? What's the tactical playbook for financial rebellion?
That brings us to the final act of the book, which is guerrilla investing, hard assets, and creating parallel systems.
Riker outlines a roadmap to armor plate wealth against inflation and state control. He advocates for a mix of dividend-paying stocks, hard assets like gold and real estate, and off-grid parallel economies.
Yeah, and the first rule of this playbook is a complete rejection of mainstream financial advice. He is openly contemptuous of Wall Street experts who get on cable television and tell the middle class to buy the dip in tech stocks.
And he hates crypto speculators, too.
Oh, totally dismissive of them. He argues that the manic gambling on meme coins is just a digital repetition of the reckless speculation that caused the 1929 stock market crash.
Instead, Riker prefers silent wealth that grows unseen. He advocates for sovereign jurisprudence, creating parallel systems, and avoiding Federal Reserve notes.
To embody this ethos, the text tells the incredible true story of a man named Ronald Read. To anyone looking at him, Reed was the absolute bottom of the socioeconomic ladder.
Yeah, he lived in Vermont, worked for years pumping gas at a service station, and later swept floors as a janitor at a JCPenney. He drove a beat-up secondhand Toyota and used safety pins to hold his worn-out flannel shirts together.
But Ronald Read understood the mathematical miracle of compounding interest better than most hedge fund managers. Every time he got a paycheck, he ruthlessly skimmed 10% off the top.
He didn't buy fancy cars or big houses.
No, he quietly invested that capital into dividend-paying, blue-chip stocks companies that made tangible things like railroads, telecommunications, and consumer staples.
And he utilized a specific mechanism called a DRP, right? A dividend reinvestment plan. When those companies paid out their quarterly dividends, Red didn't take the cash to buy coffee. The DRIP automatically used that cash dividend to buy fractional shares of the same stock.
So his share count grew automatically. The next quarter, those new fractional shares paid their own dividends, which bought more shares. It's a snowball of equity rolling down a hill for decades.
And when this humble gas station attendant finally passed away, his estate was valued at an astonishing $8 million.
It's the ultimate proof that discipline and time will always beat high-income consumption. But the book doesn't just rely on paper assets. The author is obsessed with physical, tangible reality, hard assets.
Yeah, he highlights the story of a guy living in Florida during the 2008 financial crisis. The global economy was melting down, Lehman Brothers was evaporating, people were panicking. This guy takes his wife's collection of gold bracelets.
With her permission, hopefully.
Though the book notes she threatened to divorce him over it. He physically melts the jewelry down into solid gold bullion coins.
The logic was brutal but effective. He recognized that the paper wealth of the banking system was an illusion about to pop, and he wanted his capital stored in a medium that possessed intrinsic physical properties that governments could not print or manipulate.
And by 2011, as central banks printed trillions of fiat dollars to paper over the prices, the price of gold skyrocketed, and the value of his melted down coins had tripled.
The lesson is simple. When the hallucination ends, paper wealth burns, but metal remains. Beyond stocks and gold, the text details some extremely gritty, high-yield tactical maneuvers, specifically the mechanism of buying municipal tax liens.
This is a fascinating mechanism for generating massive yields, completely outside the stock market. Let's break down exactly how a tax lien works. Say a property owner in a city like Baltimore fails to pay their annual property taxes.
The local county government still needs that tax revenue immediately to fund the schools, the police, the road repairs. They can't wait for the homeowner to eventually pay, so the county effectively sells the debt to a private investor in the form of a tax lien certificate.
The investor steps in, hands the county the cash for the back taxes, and the county gives the investor the lien. Now, the delinquent homeowner owes the investor, not the city.
Exactly. And the legal mechanism dictates that the homeowner must pay back the original tax amount, plus a statutory interest rate and penalties to clear the lien. In jurisdictions like Baltimore, depending on the specific penalties and timeframes, that annualized interest rate can hit 37%.
37%.
Yeah, if the homeowner pays, the investor walks away with a massive legally guaranteed return. If the homeowner never pays, the investor has the legal right to foreclose and seize the physical property for pennies on the dollar.
The author loves this strategy because it's tangible, it's legally enforceable, and it bypasses Wall Street entirely. But the author also prepares for scenarios where the domestic legal system itself becomes hostile.
Right. He advocates for storing portions of your hard wealth completely outside the jurisdiction of your home country. He specifically details the mechanics of utilizing Swiss free ports in places like Zurich.
A free port is essentially a massive, highly secure, climate-controlled warehouse located in a special tax zone, often near an airport. Goods stored inside a free port, whether it's gold bullion, fine art, classic cars, are legally considered to be in transit.
Therefore, they are not subject to the customs duties or taxes of the host country until they officially exit the facility.
It is the ultimate off-grid vault. The banking system could completely freeze, the government could try to confiscate domestic bank accounts, but your physical gold is sitting in a vault in the Alps, completely untouchable by the Federal Reserve.
But the author acknowledges that financial wealth is useless if you cannot survive a physical crisis. He integrates hard asset investing with a survivalist framework, emphasizing the rule of three.
Right, the mechanism here is prioritizing capital allocation based on human biology.
The rule is stark. The human body can survive 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food.
The book points out the absurdity of guys who call themselves preppers, spending $20,000 on a massive arsenal of firearms and tactical gear, but neglecting to store clean drinking water.
Right, if the grid goes down, all the guns in the world won't save you if you die of dehydration on day 4.
Therefore, the tactical advice is to convert a minimum of 10% of your liquid cash into tangible, non-perishable survival assets. Acquiring high-grade water filtration systems, solar generators to provide off-grid power, stockpiles of broad-spectrum antibiotics, and nutrient-dense, long shelf-life food.
You have to build a physical infrastructure that allows you to exist independently of the fragile, just-in-time supply chains that feed the modern city.
So what does this all mean? If everyone pulls out of the system to barter in the woods, doesn't society collapse? Let's use an analogy here. Riker isn't saying to burn down the casino. He's saying to take your chips, walk out the back door, and start your own poker game in the alley where you control the rules.
Exactly. Sovereign jurisprudence is the deliberate act of building parallel economic systems. It is the rejection of the state's monopoly on money and survival.
To illustrate the power of this concept, the book draws a brilliant, contrasting historical analogy between how the U.S. and Iceland handled the 2008 financial crisis.
In the U.S., when the massive, over-leveraged banks collapsed under the weight of their own toxic mortgage derivatives, the system essentially blackmailed the public. The government printed trillions of fiat dollars, debasing the currency, to bail out the very institutions that caused the crisis.
The banks were deemed too big to fail, and the executives walked away with their bonuses intact. Not a single major Wall Street CEO went to prison.
But the text looks at Iceland, a tiny island nation that faced a proportional banking collapse that was actually much more severe than what hit the U.S. When the Icelandic banks imploded, the citizens didn't accept a taxpayer bailout.
They literally took to the streets in what became known as the Pots and Pans Revolution, banging cookware outside the Parliament building until the government resigned.
They refused to socialize the losses, they let the corrupt banks burn to the ground, and they actively prosecuted and jailed the oligarchs and bankers responsible for the fraud.
And the crucial question is, how did their society survive without the banks?
The author argues they survived because they fell back on their tangible, hard asset parallel economy. Iceland had massive, decentralized, incredibly productive physical industries, specifically their deep-sea fishing fleets and their geothermal-powered aluminum smelting operations.
They had a real economy based on capturing physical calories and forging physical metal. They didn't need the toxic spreadsheet cells of the banking sector to eat or keep the lights on.
And that is the ultimate unifying message of the entire text. Financial sovereignty isn't a bumper sticker or a catchy metaphor. It's the deliberate, grueling, daily act of transmuting fragile paper promises, fiat currency, digital bank entries, social status into undeniable, tangible reality.
Whether that reality is a plot of fertile land, a stack of silver coins, a highly specialized mechanical skill, or a metabolically elite physical body, you have to build assets that are dense enough to outlive whatever regime is currently printing the money.
It is an incredibly heavy, intense, and demanding worldview. It requires a total paradigm shift in how you view every dollar you spend and every hour you work.
It really does. But it leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought to ponder. Something that builds on the author's theories, but looks even further out onto the horizon.
Oh, this is the AI angle.
Yeah, the entire book hinges on the idea that modern fiat currency is a shared hallucination managed by corrupt central bankers. But we are rapidly entering an era where artificial intelligence will be capable of managing vast, encrypted networks. If value is truly just a shared hallucination, as Riker says, of fiat, what happens when artificial intelligence starts to dictate what has value?
That is the truly terrifying and fascinating frontier. Will the hard assets of tomorrow strictly be physical things you can drop on your foot, like gold bars and land?
Or will the concept of a sovereign parallel economy move entirely into the digital ether? Encrypted AI-managed sovereign networks that operate at the speed of light, which physical governments literally cannot perceive, let alone regulate, tax, or confiscate.
If fiat currency is a hallucination, artificial intelligence might just be the greatest hypnotist humanity has ever faced.
Something to seriously keep you up at night as you look at your bank account.
For sure.
We want to remind you once again, if you found value in unpacking these complex mechanisms, please like and subscribe to The Deep Dive. It allows us to keep bringing you these extensive explorations of the most provocative ideas out there.
And if you are ready to explore the full, controversial, and deeply detailed roadmap we discussed today, If you want to understand the exact mechanics of androgen arbitrage or sovereign jurisprudence, you need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy Gold Standard Man, Restoring Sound Money Principles.
Finally, make sure to follow the author, at Conrad Treicher, at Substack. He provides real-time, ongoing breakdowns of the economic data and cultural shifts affecting these exact systems. Thank you for diving into the deep end with us today, and we will see you on the next one.